Welcome to Reflections, the podcast that biblically encourages, equips, and empowers women for apostolic life and service. Here's your host, Dr. Cindy Miller.
All right, so I am so happy to have some friends here with me, and I want to take a moment and introduce them before we get into our conversation for the night. So first of all, I want to recognize Keri Beason. She is my right-hand woman. She's my student assistant at UGST. She keeps me on the straight and narrow, and I'm happy to have her in every Let's Talk conversation and in my life. I'm also happy to have a very good friend, Melissa Fross, with us. And she is, I work with her. I serve with her. I don't know. I don't work. She does a lot of work. I serve with her on the UPCI Women in Ministry Network Committee. But Melissa is an ordained minister. She's a member of the pastoral staff at her church. She served as Metro missionary to Quebec City, Quebec, Canada for 5 years. She's an adjunct professor at Urshan College, and that's just a few. I just shortened your bio. A few of her highlights of investments in God's kingdom. And then I met my dear friend Bethany Hilderbrand in Alaska. So we were at a ladies' conference, and we were both speakers at that event, and absolutely fell in love with Bethany, her great heart for God, her sweet spirit, and how she loves people so well. And her ministry resume, again, she is a licensed minister. She's a teacher, a preacher. She served as youth pastor for a number of years. I don't have that in mind, but I know it was more than 2. An aimer to Prague, and you're working in mentoring now, right? You're doing a lot of mentoring with young women who are also exploring the call. So I'll tell you something about the 2 of them. One of them likes to bungee jump and would do it again. And the other has been on 3 missions trips to 3 different continents. So I'm assuming by this, like if she's already been to that continent and you invite her, she's not going back. So, you'll have to list them. Now, can you guess which one is which? Okay, I'll tell you at the end. So I hope I remember to do that. If not, I'll put it in the article. How about that? All right, are you enjoying winter? Is it all working out for you? Because in Missouri, where Melissa's from, we like February ice storms. I mean, every time I'm on campus in February, we're like all about ice. So
after Quebec, this is nothing. I moved to Quebec in the middle of winter, so I have 0 complaints about a Midwest winter.
Okay. All right. So when we're at symposium in February, you don't want to hear me. You don't want to hear it. Okay. I got it. No whining. Everything good for you this winter?
Absolutely. This is Wisconsin, so we get absolutely all kinds of winter. No problems here. I can't. If you complain, you have to be, stupid. So you have to move somewhere else.
Wimpy.
Go south.
Go south. Go to Florida.
I love snow. I love it.
Oh, I do not.
Most of the time.
I do not.
I do.
No.
I love to look at it.
I used to. I used to love snow, but I so do not anymore.
No.
Well, so you all know what's around the corner, right? You know what's coming. It's going to be the topic. Well, it's not the topic, but it's leading to the topic, right? I'll give you a hint. It's about red and pink, hearts and flowers, lots of candy, Valentine's. Are y'all just like ignoring it? Doesn't happen in your real world?
The actual holiday is February 15th because that's when the chocolate goes on sale.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Well, so I have this couple in my church. They're hilarious. And her husband only buys all the Valentine's stuff on February 15th. So they celebrated on February the 15th.
Right.
They're probably the smartest.
And he won't pay full price. I love
Smart
it.
man. Yeah.
I think that's awesome. But with that in mind, I want to bring up something. This page, Let's Talk, is kind of what's happening is as I'm traveling and I'm in different places and having conversations with women in the UPCI, they bring up topics of interest and conversations. And one of them has been about what the experience of single women in the UPCI and ministry and in church life, and just as single women, what's that like? And so I thought of my friends, people I love who are thriving and doing so well in life. And I thought, I just want to bring you into this conversation as the experts, and you can talk to us about what it's like being single and ministry and church life. And I'm going to just get started with some questions, and then y'all just jump in as you want to. So there are some standard, I think, stereotypes that single women may feel like that they deal with, that are still prevalent in churches today. And I'd like for you to just share with us, do you feel like there's anything, either myths or stereotypes, anything in that direction, that as single women in ministry, in church life, that you feel like you're dealing with, that you still face?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. I feel definitely, yes, there are stereotypes. And I think one of the biggest reasons is within the church structure, which is so traditionally based, because obviously this is founded on what God instituted. Marriage and the family, the home life, is what we all have been designed for, and what we all love and what we all appreciate. So for myself, to see that hasn't happened yet, there is an element of feeling incomplete, of feeling like I missed the boat, or there's something wrong with me, or for some reason, God has kind of forgotten about me. And that's been a struggle, to just deal with those emotions. So the stereotype of life hasn't really started as a woman until you're married, until you now have children, until your family begins. And that's not something people necessarily have said, but it's intrinsic. It's something that has just kind of happened because of our culture. So to answer the question, yes, I think there definitely are stereotypes that we've had to kind of face, and not necessarily fight, but live around and show myself, but also the church, and then those that perhaps are looking at me wondering how to do it, that you can enjoy life without a husband. You can be single and living for God and thriving and loving it, for all the things that maybe they hadn't really considered can be a part of being single. So it's not all bad.
Well, I like that. And I want to get Melissa's response, and then I want to come back to some of those things that you said before we end tonight about what women are experiencing. What's wrong with me? Did I miss it? Have I missed the will of God, or did God forget about me? So I want to come back to that. Melissa?
So I'm going to come at it from the ministry perspective. I think Bethany did a great job summarizing kind of from that personal experience in a church and the church culture and all of that. From a ministry perspective, I think our stereotypes fuel our assumptions about other people. And so when I show up to a conference, or I show up to preach at a church, when I was deputizing, for example, there are assumptions made about me. One of which often is that I am married to the missionary who was going to preach that night, or that I was at a conference that is just amazing, and the church did an amazing job, and I have zero complaints about anything. But a funny story that happened: the church provided transportation to its events for all of the ministers who had signed up for registration, and they only let families travel together on the transportation. So I'm with my friend who's a female. Her husband was running a little bit late to meet us. And so we went to get in line to get in the bus, and the gentleman loading the bus said, well, you have to wait for your husband, and my friend said, oh, my husband's on his way. And he turns to me and he says, well, where's your husband? I said, your guess is as good as mine. And the sweet older lady beside me said, oh, honey, we can find you a husband here. So
Thank you.
I don't take myself too seriously in the respect of, I think it'd be easy to be easily offended by things like that. I mean, I've gotten letters in the mail Dear Reverend and Mrs. Melissa Fross.
Mhm.
And it's just because I don't fit the model. I don't fit the stereotype. And so the assumption that comes out of the stereotype is often wrong about me. I just laugh, it's part of the growth process as we as an organization or a movement learn that we come in a lot of different packages and a lot of different manners that God, uses us. So.
Was it hard to get to that point where you could kind of laugh about it? Was there ever a time where it was more hurtful or offensive?
I don't know that it was ever hurtful because I never really saw it as a personal attack. It said more about what was coming at me than about me not fitting, the stereotype. So I probably, one of the interesting things about the way that Lord has worked in my life is I wasn't called to preach till I was 30. So in my 20s, if I had been in ministry and it had been a different time in my life where maybe I hadn't been as comfortable with who I am and what I am, it might have affected me differently, but into my 30s, I could laugh at it pretty easily.
Yeah, because you were more secure in your identity. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Keri, thoughts before we move to the next question?
I think one of the things that we push onto our young people and being a young person is that there is this stigma of people wanting young ladies to be married by the age of 25. And in today's day and culture, that's not the case. And that if you're not married, then you're missing the mark. And that you may not even have a chance to be involved in ministry. And I don't think that we should be pushing that on to our young ladies, because then it shoves them into situations that they may not want for their life. And I don't think that's fair.
Yeah. Well, I am married, but I was single for a while, and it was just so funny because you could just, I was an AIM worker to Greece, and I thought my life was just going great. I thought I was having a wonderful life until I'd get to church, and then everybody would be like so worried about me because I wasn't married. And then, oh, I don't have a great life. No, I'm not doing anything for God. Oh, there is not a man to validate me. How terrifying. So I guess that's still going on. I was hopeful that maybe it wasn't as common today, but I guess I think there's a couple of things. I can jump in on it, but I think part of it is the security of who you are in your own self, your identity, and also, kind of where you are in the process. Age, stage has a lot to do with it, I'm sure.
I think your environment too. I mean, when we talked about me participating in this, Cindy, I said, I don't know that I'll be very relatable. I've been in a very supportive environment most of my adult life where it's not really been imposed on me that there's an expectation that, isn't being met. So I think my experience has been different because I have a pastor who values, people in all stages of life, and he preaches that and he talks about that. And I think that makes a big difference. Every age, every stage, we should get that validation when we go to church, and my church culture, my local church culture has just been very different.
Mm-hmm. Well, then you are one of the rare fortunate ones that you could, come to this point in life saying, I don't know what you all are talking about. That's amazing.
Yeah. I can concur as well. I do have a very supportive situation as well. However, I feel like some of what we feel is by nature, just being the woman. And like Keri said, in the younger stages of life, there is this pressure to have a boyfriend, to get married, to again be connected to somebody to validate us. And so even with, and because I understand that my pastor as well is very supportive, my family is very supportive, and yet I can't turn off the voice that says it still would be nice, or there is still perhaps something wrong with my life. And I don't mean wrong. I just mean there is a reason. And I have come to terms with the fact that it's God's plan that until whenever that is, he's preparing whoever he is. If there is a he, I've had to lay that at his feet and then be completely content with where not only who he has made me, but where he has placed me. For the very reason that other people are needing that particular encouragement and maybe don't have a supportive ministry team, are in a church that looks at them kind of sideways when they walk in the building still, and as time goes by, it gets worse because you get older, and your biological clock is ticking and, all of the things your family, the rest of your family's growing and yours isn't, so
All
you
real
can't help
things.
that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this, in church life, when are you most aware, if you are at all, of being single in the crowd? So in the going to events, going to services, is there a time where you feel like you're most aware of being single? And if so, is that good or is it bad, or is it doesn't impact you either way?
So I would give another example just from a very public conference that I was at. And because I was traveling at the time as a Metro missionary in deputation, they had seated us in a particular section. And so I'm seated with men and women who are all in missions work. And at one point, they called all of the ministers' wives to the front for prayer. And that meant that I and two other ladies who were single missionaries, or one was a widow, one was single, were left in the missionary section with the rest of the men. And on one hand, I wasn't bothered, but it stood out to me. I didn't take it personally, but at the same time, it was like, again, where do I fit? Like, there's no clear spot for somebody like me, because what the intention was to pray for the ladies who are doing ministry and missions, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not what was said. What was said was the wives.
The verbiage.
And I think that happens fairly frequently, that we label women as wives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen that happen numerous times. Or what's really funny is an event, a district event, for example, where it says all ministers and wives. Well, I'm a minister, like I texted my district superintendent and said, I'm not bringing a wife. I don't care. I want to, but I'm not bringing a wife. So it's just funny. You have to laugh about it, but there are those moments.
I think that's a Titanic that is slowly turning, a little slower in some districts, some areas, but it is turning. I live in a district that is very open to women in ministry, thank God. But I don't mean that because, it just, there are places and areas where it's perhaps just not as common. So in those districts, in those events, and I would say that's, in my own experience, that's probably where I do notice it the most, is at even a general conference, for instance. I see my friends from Bible school, my missionary friends, my friends that, I met on AIM, and going all the way back, and most of them are married, most of them have families. And so that's when it's probably the most painful, if I can use that strong language, because, these are my peers. And I think, just feeling the lack of perhaps what they have, and not that they don't accept me like I am. In fact, I feel very comfortable. But it's, again, the stigma that isn't talked about, but it's just glaring in a way sometimes. So I just override it mentally and emotionally, and I just do what I need to do as the person that they love, regardless of my marital status, and have fun, and show them you can have fun, and life is wonderful as a single person. And I think that sometimes kind of, because again, it's a stereotype, which means people are there whether they want to be or not thinking. So when you show them another way, then it kind of trips their mindset, like, oh, right, it's not wrong to be single, or it's not a sin, or it's not a crime, or it's not anything negative. It's just God's plan for their life. So, and they're showing how to do it. And so,
well, I want to ask
actually,
yeah, let me ask a question, then I want to hear your input, because this is really amazing. You said it's glaringly obvious glaringly obvious to you or to them, kind of like who's feeling it. But then also when we're talking about district events and conferences, is it the awkwardness of, oh, well, we have singles over here, we have the marrieds over here, and you're thinking, well, I really like what they're doing on the other side. I don't know. Talk to me about that. And you were about to say something, Melissa. What was your thought?
I was just going to say, singleness is biblically valued.
Yeah.
And there's a high value placed on that, what could be a stage of life or what could be someone's dedication in life. But
exactly,
I think we need to remember that as a church, that it's not a stigma, it's highly valued. But at the same time, thinking about your question, I struggle with the idea of local churches dividing ministry by marital status. And I struggle for a few reasons. I think when people change marital status is one of the most stressful times in life, whether it's getting married or getting divorced or being widowed. And what we inadvertently do by segregating at the local church level is we remove social support systems at a crucial time, because we move them into a new class at Sunday school or a new fellowship group. Or I very much support singles conferences, married retreats, young married date night, whatever. But at that local church level, when we segregate based on marital status, we are communicating a very strong message.
Right.
You belong here when this happens, and you belong here when this happens. I as a former pastor, I really struggle with imposing that concept on my church.
I think the intent is for inclusion, but interestingly enough, it sometimes does the opposite, like what you just said. And I think, people from a marital standpoint, so the married pastor, for instance, who sets up a singles ministry in their church, they think we need to minister to the singles. We need to make sure that there's a place for them, thinking that they can't find a place otherwise, or that they can't relate to the married couple. I personally, I feel I don't like the label. I don't like people to know me because of my singleness. I want them to know me because of me, period, regardless of my marital status. And I know that's part of my life, but I don't want that to label me. I want to be fun to be around and be attractive in a way that, is engaging regardless of if you have a spouse or not. I don't want you to feel awkward. I have very close married friends in my church that we fellowship all the time, and there's no awkward. I'm friends with both of them. And it should be that way. I think in the kingdom, I absolutely agree with you, Melissa. It shouldn't be based on marital status. And I think, again, the intent was probably to include or to make sure we address that for you so you don't feel left out. But I think that maybe is missing the point, or it doesn't really speak to how that particular person should or should not feel. And maybe widening the span of what can fellowship really look like. And how can it really minister?
And I think you're absolutely right. Those intentions are there. And what ends up happening is we try to create a culture by scheduling a class, a culture of inclusion versus that scheduled time where everyone is in their place, so to speak.
Yeah. Right.
It feels a lot different when it's cultural. And I agree with you. My best friends are married couples. It's just, it's part of probably where I am in my life and where you are in your life. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to be divided on the basis of that at a local church level.
Exactly.
So what do we say to leaders then? What are we asking for? What are we saying is important? Just look for topics that are across the board, powerful to everyone, and let them choose for themselves. What are some thoughts? People are going to be reading, watching. What do we want them to know? What would be helpful?
I would say the fact that, you can't not address marital status in a church setting. I do agree with that. And because there are many people in that situation, obviously not by choice. So whether you're a widow or widower, whether you've been abandoned, and so, you're in a divorce situation that you did not ask for. I will just make one small little personal reference. I was in a very serious relationship with somebody that it looked like it was going to be marriage. And He was a minister, associate pastor, and I honestly thought this was it. And multiple God conversations with people. We were actually introduced by somebody, strong mentor of mine, that they didn't necessarily feel God said, you are supposed to get married, but they introduced us. So there was a lot of confirmations along the way. And it ended up falling apart after just a few months, which was devastating. But in the middle of that, God spoke to me very clearly. And he said, Bethany, I had been in ministry very seriously right before that, and got my license, and I was doing more preaching and doing more ministering. But God said, you have been reaching to women in the altar and ministering to them and loving on them. And they have been ministered to you, but they have not felt like you could relate to them. Now you can relate to the pain of abandonment or the pain of rejection, pain of being left in a situation that you did not ask for. And I'm going to use you to minister to them in a way that I could not have before. So those types of scenarios or situations, that's where ministry is. Rubber meets road. That's the point of the kingdom. That's the point of ministry. It's to reach to somebody, maybe with a personal experience or without a personal experience, but letting them know that God sees them and that there is hope for them. And to answer your question specifically, singles ministry versus married ministry, it's all good, but I think the point of reaching to people where they are, in a way of providing, yes, conversations, classes that do talk specifically. I think, we need to minister to the divorce. We do need to minister to those that are widowed. We do need to minister to those that are in their 40s and never been married. Those are real demographics that God sees, across the board. So
it matters. It matters to him. And
yeah,
I think it matters to all of us as ministry women too. I mean, we love people. That's why we're in ministry. We want to promote God's purpose, so these things are important that we talk about them.
I think as in pastoral ministry, we need to remember the concept of seasons and series.
Yeah.
Because you can do things in a series that does not divide people over the long term.
Sure.
Series or I think of Grief Share, it's a seasonal class that not everybody attends. It's something that you go when you need that. And I think the more we can approach ministry in that way, we can meet needs while still keeping a sense of unity in the culture.
Well, let me ask you the question that the really fun one. So what do you do? Like, people are always saying to me about, how can we meet somebody? How do I meet a potential spouse? Does UPCI have some kind of online dating service? Or and I can remember, I don't know how y'all feel about this, but I always hated somebody trying to do the matchmaking thing with me. Like, the minute they wanted to do matchmaking, I just went into some kind of weird mode in my life. But loneliness is a real thing, right? I mean, loneliness. So let's talk for just a few minutes about loneliness and people who try to matchmake and where you're at with all of that. And if you want me to matchmake, just let me know. I'm really terrible at it, but I always think I have great ideas, but then, they're really, Keri, don't never let me matchmake for you. You'll quit. You won't be my student assistant anymore. So thoughts on that? How do I find somebody to date? That's the question they asked me.
It was brought to my attention in this past spring semester before I left for Madagascar that one of my best friends, she's a great person, due to situations, I'm not going to mention her name, but we were talking after service that I just showed up to listen to her preach at. And I asked her how was married life, because she had gotten married and, things were going great. And she looked at me and she's like, Keri, you're going to get married someday. And I said, yeah, in God's timing, I'm not worried about it. Like, I'm comfortable where I'm at. I'm comfortable in my singleness. But one of the things that she told me was to throw out the list that so many books have put on us. And they're great things. They are. But she said, throw out the list that I had made and instead pray this new list. And the new list that she gave me was spirit-led, spirit-filled, and teachable. And since I've been praying that, God has developed things in my life, but also it's also helped me not feel like I have to interview somebody to date them. No, I'm not dating, but I don't have time to. But it takes off a lot of the pressure, and it actually opens up the possibility. Because when you ask so many questions, you put somebody in a box. Now, there are important questions that you need to ask, of course, but some people have like this whole list in their head of like, well, they have to be such and such feet tall, and they have to have such and such color hair. And like, I get it. We all have attractions and things that we are attracted to, but you need to take it out of the box, open up possibilities. And I think that that's one thing that has helped me in these last few months.
So does that mean you're going to allow me to do matchmaking? I mean, what are you getting from this?
I don't think right now we even have time to like consider dating.
No.
Let's wait for the spring semester when things open up.
I'll wait till the summer. Thoughts? What do y'all feel about the matchmaking? Do people ever ask you how you meet someone, or do you want to, or what do you do with loneliness?
So just being, open, I have trusted friends who know that part of my life. And it's very rare that I am deeply saddened by loneliness. It doesn't happen to me very often. Mm-hmm. But when it does happen, I have two people in my life who I call, mm-hmm. and I'll let them know this is what I'm experiencing right now. They specifically help me pray about those things, and they just listen to me. Mm-hmm. So that's how I deal with it. In terms of the matchmaking thing, I think I have a unique spin on this because the Lord specifically asked me to stay single for another season a few years ago. And so I feel like there's a promise at the end of that, and knowing that God is preparing something for me, whatever that looks like, changes the way that I see my life right now. Now, there's no guarantee on the other side that God's will for my life is going to happen, right? In the form of a man, because he still has to pick me. And that's the hardest decision for anybody to make, right? He still has, like, my list is short. Love Jesus, love dogs, love Christmas. Loving me is going to be the hardest thing he has to do. So
dogs and Christmas, I love it.
I try to keep that in mind that, God has a will, but I have to be flexible and open to the idea that he might not pick me. The guy might not at the end of the day pick me. And am I okay with Jesus? Can I make it through that kind of a challenge if what I think is going to happen doesn't turn out to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Being secure in your calling, being secure in yourself, who you are as a woman, and the life that you've created with God for yourself, I think is what's the sustaining force, Bethany, thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I totally agree with all of that. It's excellent. I did have a list several years back when I was actually in Prague. I would love to go find coffee shops and sit with my journal, and I would write to Jesus. And part of that was, imagining what my life is going to look like in 5, 10, 20 years. Of course, that was 20 years ago. So in my life now is not at all what I really expected, but that's okay. But you talk about seasons as well, and that has been part of life as well for me. I eventually just kind of let go of that particular list, like you were saying, Keri, and what has become priority has been finding somebody or asking God for who he knows would fit me because of who I am. And God knows better than anybody, even myself. I don't know myself as good as God does. So he knows how to match somebody for me. So I'm leaving that in his hands. And at the same time, recently, God and I have had a few conversations about it. And he actually said, how about you just let me be enough for you? Why don't you stop worrying about it or just stop thinking about it And would you let me be enough? And I had to physically, consciously say, yes, you are enough. So that was a couple of years ago. And I decided to have Jesus over for dates. I made him dinner. I set the table. I had candles. I made him my favorite meal. I had jazz music playing and a candle burning. And I set the table for him, and he sat across from me, and we talked over dinner. I had him for Thanksgiving when my family couldn't be with me. We went and had sushi together. I mean, I treat him as my husband, and I have allowed him that place in my life because I do trust him. And I know he knows my heart. He knows what I feel that I'm lacking better than anyone. And he can fill it with himself. Obviously not in every way. He knows that too, though. So whoever he's preparing for me, I'm leaving that in his hands. And I'm 46 now. And again, 20 years ago, I never would have imagined that that's where I would be. And yet I've had to relax and just let him be that and trust him because he knows better than anybody. And the whole matchmaking thing, I'm totally okay with that as well. I wasn't before. So that's kind of flipped. My sister rebuked me. She said, Bethany, why don't you stop saying no? Just at least say yes for one date of coffee with people that they want to say. So I have relaxed there as well. And I'll have coffee and then pray about it, you know? So there's kind of two sides of that as well. You can't be too restrictive. Because you're right. You know, if you've got your certain requirements that they don't fit, that's not fair. If the Lord probably is maybe working something out. So trust God, period.
Well, and I think too, it's okay to have friends. You know, everything doesn't have to lead to marriage.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, to say no to, you know, friendship is really, you know, really, you're missing out on some, you know, really valuable people. I want to end our wonderful conversation. I don't want to end it, but, you know, we have to somewhere. I love a statement that Melissa made in our prior conversation. We had been chatting back and forth. And so we talked about leading up to this conversation, and she made this statement, and Melissa, if I misquote you, you can correct it. But she just talked about right now she's in a stage of life where she's she said this, just minding my own business while trying to mind his business. And I just love that so much, because I think you don't have to be single or married to appreciate the focus there. Like, wow, you know, like, hey, the more focused I am on him, whatever's going on in my life that is not ideal, I'm just trusting he's going to take care of it, and I'm just going to mind his business and let he'll take care of mine. So I want to thank you for all being with me today. Any last words, advice before you set the alarm to go out on February 15th and raid all the chocolate everywhere? Any last thought or comments? I'm going to share readers or viewers.
I think I would just say, you know, enjoy your life. You only get one.
Yeah.
And if you spend most of it wishing you had a different one, it's such a waste. It's such a waste of the joy and the passion you can have in your life to do great things for God and to do fun things in your life. And, you know, don't be afraid to have dinner alone. It's actually fun. I mean, you can learn to enjoy it in the sense of going somewhere new and experiencing things, and, you know, don't be afraid to go do stuff by yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, be content in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree. I would also say, when you invest in other people, when you give to other people, it takes the loneliness, and it also shows them how to perhaps get through where they're at. And also to remember that there may be people looking at your life wishing they had what you have, that we're not the only ones on this side of the fence that are looking at other people, but there are people that are perhaps wishing they had what we have. And so it's not bad to necessarily compare, and it's bad to compare, but remember that maybe it's not so bad, because again, there may be somebody that looking at us and thinking, hey, that's not a bad situation at all. I might be jealous. So God's got you where you are for a reason.
Yeah.
And because of that, maybe that's how you got to Alaska and we got to meet, right? You might not have been in Alaska any other way. Absolutely.
Thanking God for that.
I am so thankful for friends. I just admire you women and love you so much. I'm glad you're in my life. And you know, I think you're fun. I think you're smart. I think you're beautiful. So when we have these conversations, I'm just like, these are women I want to know. These are women I want to spend time with. And I'm sure the viewers are going to feel the exact same way, that they're very privileged they got to spend time with you. So thank you for joining me. I hope we talk again soon.
Love you, Dr. Miller.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Bye.